Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Local Development Plan Advisory Committee meeting. Before we can proceed onto the agenda items, we will need to elect a chair, as Councillor Mason has given his apologies for this evening. So please can I request for any nominations?
Councillor
Hi,
Sebeers.
Councillor Block here. I'd like to nominate Councillor Sebeers.
Okay, thank you. And can I get a seconder, please?
I'm seconding Councillor Manro.
Okay, and does everyone agree?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Please take the chair, Councillor.
Thank you very much, and welcome formally to the Local Development Plan Advisory Committee, everybody. I'd like to just put on record my thanks to the previous chair for all the work that's done before, and also for Councillor Bell for stepping in at the previous one. In terms of general housekeeping, I'm sure everyone's run through the rules, but either raise your hand or wave to speak. Please try and remain muted during the meeting, so we've got a number of speakers today. I'll open it for questions and everything's going through on that level. In the first instance, we're dealing with apologies for absence, and obviously the apologies from Councillor Mason will be recorded. I don't believe there are any other apologies.
No, there are no other apologies. Thank you.
Thank you. And that takes us on to urgent matters, which I don't believe we have any either on the agenda at the moment.
No, there are none.
Cool. All right. Item number 3 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? I can't see any hands, so it looks like we have no declarations of interest. So we shall move on to item 4, which is matters considered in private. I don't believe we've got anything specific on that at the moment, so we should be fine on that level. That takes us to item 5 on the agenda, which is the published draft minutes. These start on page 5 of the agenda paper. I'll go through them page by page or just by naming each page. If anyone's got any questions or comments, please shout after I've made the point. So on page 5, which is the first page of the minutes, on page 6, which is the second page, on page 7, that's the final page of the minutes. Are we happy to agree those as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you very much, councillors. All right, that then takes us on to the main substantive item of the night, which is item number 6, Ealing Council's Local Development Plan Update, the Planning White Paper and Infrastructure. So what we have here, we have 3 guest outside speakers who will actually go through 3 different presentations, and we'll actually take all of those one following the other, going through the details on that, and then we can open it out for a general discussion after that point. So I think on that basis, are we able to go to the first speaker, or do we need a small introduction at all?
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm the first speaker, Sam Cuthbert, Ealing Council Strategic Planning team, and I'm here to discuss the Strategic Infrastructure Delivery Plan, basically as background and context to the rest of the discussion. I will put my presentation up on screen.
Thank you.
Right, so stop me if that is not there. The Strategic Infrastructure Delivery Plan, as I say, it's mainly background to this evening's discussion. The project itself is a West London Alliance project. It was funded by Planning Delivery Fund monies, and it's a project with all 7 West London boroughs and the OPDC participating. It is linked to new London Plan growth targets. However, the aim of the work is also to address broader strategic objectives, which I will come to in a moment. It's not intended specifically to replace individual borough infrastructure delivery plans, and my colleague Isabel Joyce will talk about the work on Ealing's IDP in a moment. But it will be a source of common evidence on planned and committed schemes across each of the different boroughs, which we don't necessarily know about in detail at the moment. However, it also takes a broader interest in patterns of growth across West London, and therefore the joint opportunities that might arise from those. It has a greater focus on strategic opportunities, not so much on specific costed projects to meet defined need. And therefore, overall, we can think of the SIDP as being a more speculative document, whereas the individual borough IDPs are more focused on specific projects. Turning then to the broad infrastructure themes that it considers, transport does remain a substantial emphasis in the work, even though the West London orbital itself has now progressed far enough to constitute a separate work stream over and above this piece of evidence, which WLA is also managing. Broadly speaking, as you can see from the context map that I've provided, the north and west of the sub-region remain substantially car dependent. That's the orange areas. And Ealing reflects this in having more of a public transport focus on travel to work in the Ealing and Acton areas, and more of a private motorised focus in the northwest of the borough. Orbital journeys remain difficult across the sub-region, and this has, I think, if anything, been emphasised by the effects of COVID, which have seen people carry out fewer tidal journeys into central London and more journeys within the sub-region itself. Overall, it highlights the potential for growth and transport improvements to both enable each other, which reflects early work that the borough is undertaking specifically in Northull that councillors and members of the public may already be aware of. Other infrastructure themes include decarbonisation, particularly of homes and workplaces, but also continuing work on distributed energy schemes, which are seeing different and improved economics as part of the continuing drive for decarbonisation, and of course the borough's declaration of a climate emergency. West London as a whole meets the Environment Agency definition of water stress, and this is best addressed by both the strategic reduction of transmission losses through the water mains network, but also by coordination in the improved efficiency of use in individual boroughs and even down to individual developments. There are substantial opportunities across the sub-region for improvements to green space, whether those are to the green space itself or improved access, particularly across borough boundaries, which may be impaired at present. Broadband, of course, is a continuing concern, again emphasised by the present circumstances, but it's traditionally difficult for boroughs to successfully engage with broadband infrastructure providers, and the West London context of this study makes it much easier to do that. The study's also identified initially quite a substantial shift in the pattern of employment, more jobs in less accessible areas, which in this context means a lower proportion of jobs in town centres and a higher proportion in the very substantial areas of industrial land which characterise West London. What the study will not be looking at, however, are schools and community facilities, which of course are not strategic. They tend to be far more site specific, and therefore that's the kind of thing better covered in borough IDPs. A quick word on future proofing. Obviously, the Commission predates both COVID and the full consequences of Brexit. And infrastructure planning itself is inherently speculative and future orientated, and so it's unavoidably prone to risk and change. However, the SID in particular is intended to constitute more of a flexible framework of needs and opportunities, less specifically costed projects to fill identified needs. And London itself is likely to be less affected by any absolute change in needs and more by changes in the location or the particular shape of needs as a result of these unexpected changes. There's already an apparent shift to the suburbs, both in retail patterns and particularly in employment. And that's something that the study itself and continuing work will continue to look at. And that's particularly relevant to the business case that's being assembled for the West London Orbital. It's likely that any real setback in a London context is more likely to affect when and less likely what and how it might be delivered, although there are specific impacts for any London-wide mega projects, particularly Crossrail 2, although again, thankfully, that is not within the sub-region and not within Ealing Borough. So to summarise then, the initial draft, in fact, has not just been received, it will be received on Friday, and we do expect publication of the SIDP in early 2021. It will be a very useful resource for local plan making and also for broader West London efforts to make the strategic case for infrastructure needs against what are quite rapidly changing funding priorities. It will also be quite useful to help us understand the implications of the new infrastructure levy when those are known, because rather than just looking at immediate needs and opportunities, it will identify broader and longer term opportunities and how those might fit into a new infrastructure funding methodology. It's a much more open framework than the IDP and tends not to concern specific projects to quite the same extent. For their part, Brexit and COVID and any other uncertainties that come about are really variables that would be best explored in individual business cases. And as we'll see in a little bit more detail when we come on to the IDP itself, that is work that's very much integral to infrastructure planning. So that's the brief overview I had of the SIDP, and I think I'm now handing over to my colleague Isabel Joyce.
Hi Sam, thanks for that. Hello everyone, I will just share my screen quickly. Can everyone see that?
That's visible to me. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Hello, so my name is Isabel Joyce and I'm a Chartered Town Planner from Arup in London. But since August, I've been seconded on a part-time basis to the local plan team at Ealing, working with them to work towards Regulation 18 local plan. And as part of that, one of the main things that we've been focusing on is developing an infrastructure delivery plan that Sam just referred to. So I'm also here today with my colleagues Anna Richards, James Lambert and Alice Bennett, as they've been helping us compile the infrastructure baseline report, which is the first stage of the infrastructure delivery plan. So I'll hand over to them shortly, and they're going to run through some specific sectors for you and give an update of what we found out so far. But I'm just going to quickly run through what we're going to focus on in total today in this presentation, and then give a brief overview of what an infrastructure delivery plan is. So as you can see, we're going to look at what the infrastructure delivery plan is. I'll give a brief overview of how it sits within the local plan programme and how it supports the delivery of projects that Sam referred to. And then I'll hand over to my colleagues who will give an overview of the infrastructure baseline report. And as you can see, there's quite a long list of sectors that we're considering in this report. So they're going to give an overview of what we found so far, and then I'll summarise with the next steps for you. So moving swiftly on to what an infrastructure delivery plan is. Sam has just given a brief outline in discussing the SIDP. But essentially, as he mentioned, the infrastructure delivery plan is at a more local level than the strategic infrastructure delivery plan, although it will bring in the findings from the strategic infrastructure delivery plan and build upon them, as they're key things that need to be factored into the local plan. It's an iterative document. I think that's the most important thing to stress today, which means that it will run with the life of the local plan. So it starts as an evidence-based document to inform some key decisions in the development of the local plan, identifying the infrastructure requirements that will be needed to support planned growth and growth targets from both an Ealing perspective and a London plan perspective. And it also includes estimated costs and a funding gap for those infrastructure requirements, which will sit as an evidence-based document with the local plan through examination. But it also then will act as a live document to inform future decision making around infrastructure. So we create a project schedule which lists all of the projects that are currently in the process or that have been identified as a demand, and there'll be a project prioritization exercise which will help inform future decision making. And the other key thing to highlight is that the IDP is also a really important evidence base for the development of a local SIL or whatever infrastructure levy may take the shape after the recent planning reforms are enacted. So just to highlight what the relationship is with the local plan, because I think it's really important to show that it's not just a document that will sit there, and we really want to use it as a decision-making tool and to inform the local plan development. Essentially, it will identify costs and also opportunities to reflect the relationship between infrastructure and growth. And that's a really key way in which it will support the local plan, because it will recognise that whilst growth creates a demand for infrastructure, it can also be a way of funding infrastructure and delivering it. So it really provides guidance for key mechanisms of land value capture and helps support negotiations for Section 106 agreements and things like that moving forward. So it's a really key document to support the local plan and play a role in the development and delivery of the local plan ambitions. So as you can see from the diagram on the slide, that looks quite complex, but I'll try and talk you through it. We've just tried to summarise the iterative process that we go through, working alongside the development of the local plan. So if you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, infrastructure baseline report is currently the stage that we're at the moment. And this essentially is just a review of where the borough is at the moment in terms of infrastructure, and I'm going to pass over to my colleague Anna shortly, who will give you more detail on that. But just to say, that's our current stage. So we're not yet looking at the future and what's going to be needed. We're just looking at what the current situation is. The next stages will be to draw on the housing trajectory, the existing working regeneration areas, and the character and capacity study to develop growth assumptions for where the growth will be, how extensive that growth may be, and what requirements for infrastructure may come out of that. And at this stage, we'll do further engagement with infrastructure providers and other departments within the council. And that will lead to another infrastructure assessment on those growth locations, linking up with the site allocations of the local plan, which all then sort of combines together to form the Regulation 18 local plan that will be consulted on, which is sort of the early stage local plan with the issues and options. And that's where we'll have our initial draft infrastructure delivery plan. And then moving on to the rest of the life cycle of the local plan, we'll create that IDP and project schedule that I mentioned, and then that will flow into future decision making and anything else that may happen around a local SIL or other infrastructure levy. So I hope that helps in sort of setting it in context and what it will be used for and how it changes as a document and a tool. So thinking about what we include in an infrastructure delivery plan, as Sam mentioned, we will look at more locally specific infrastructure compared to the strategic infrastructure delivery plan, which includes social infrastructure. So you can see on this list, we've got education, health, and community facilities, as well as sports facilities. And then we do also look at transport, open space, and your utilities and climate change. So there's quite an array of things here which we tried to cover because they're key things that need to be delivered to support the growth in the local plan. But it's worth also flagging that these this research and the infrastructure delivery plan will also support, and we're liaising with other departments in the council, so it will support things like the LIP for transport and other documents that the council are working on. So I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Anna, who is going to run through the initial emerging findings of the infrastructure baseline report. Anna? There you go.
Thanks, Isabel. So we're, as Isabel described, we're in the first stages of the process and currently producing the infrastructure baseline report, which is essentially looking at the current context and existing provision of infrastructure. So looking at policies and strategies to understand key drivers and policy objectives for infrastructure across all the sectors, looking at how well it the existing population, there are constraints and short-term provision. What's currently planned, so the project pipeline or what's being delivered in terms of improvements, new provision, new facilities, etc. And also emerging trends in terms of demographic trends, migration, changing travel patterns and economic trends which may influence how infrastructure needs to be planned for and delivered in the future. So moving on to some key findings and looking first of all at education. At primary school level, looking at existing provision, the recent trend has been following on from falling birth rates, falling roles and reducing demand for primary school places, which is a trend that's reflected across London and nationally. And the council has been managing this by reducing planned emissions at primary schools, around nine primary schools, I believe, across the borough, to help those schools manage their numbers and their budgets. Looking forward, the current projections are seeing birth rates pretty steady over the next 4 to 5 years, and then gradually rising again after that. So the council expects to have sufficient capacity in existing primary schools to cope with demand over the next 5 years, the current projection period. But this comes with a quite significant caveat that the projections don't yet fully reflect planned growth, so planned housing growth. And the planning policy team are currently working on a housing trajectory which will set out housing numbers by ward. Once this is agreed, it will feed into both Ealing and GLA pupil projections and is likely to show an increased demand for places, in particular in areas like Southall, where there's significant planned housing growth. It's likely to be a significant demand for additional school places. Also, it's probably worth noting that whilst there's capacity across the borough as a whole, there are clearly schools within the borough that are very popular and oversubscribed, and in some areas where there might be a cluster of oversubscribed and popular schools, pupils may be having to travel further or indeed out of the borough to access school places. In terms of the project pipeline and planned projects at primary level, there's planned rebuild of Three Bridges Primary School due to open in 2021, and increased SEND provision at a number of primary schools, including Havelock and Fielding schools. At secondary level, the sort of peak in birth rates is now hitting the secondary school level and creating very high demand for places. And this is combined with the fact that Ealing has a number of very popular schools at secondary level, meaning that currently all secondary schools, or nearly all secondary schools, are filling to capacity with very little capacity for additional growth. With recent expansions and the additional places that are going to be created at the Arc Zone Secondary School, which is due to open in September 2021, the council expects to have sufficient capacity to meet demand for the sort of current 5-year projection period. But again, this is with the caveat that it doesn't yet account for planned growth. And so over the longer term, there's likely to be need for additional places and potentially a new secondary school in the Southall area. In terms of planned projects at secondary, in addition to the Arc Zone school due to open next September, Villiers High School is also looking at potential to increase capacity, and there are planned improvements, redevelopments of existing provision at Stanhope and Northolt High Schools. It's probably also worth noting that at secondary level, in terms of cross-boundary movement, Ealing is currently a net exporter of pupils to neighbouring boroughs, particularly Hounslow and Hillingdon South, probably reflecting popularity of schools and lack of capacity currently close to the borders with these boroughs. So looking at what this means, what all this means for the local plan, as current projections don't fully take account of planned growth. Once the housing trajectory is finalised, and the projections will be updated to reflect planned housing growth. A couple of issues it's worth noting. There's a significant increase in demand for special needs places, reflecting a nationwide and London-wide trend. There's some uncertainty over future migration patterns and the impact of Brexit and any potential economic downturn on movements in and out of the borough. Currently, pupil projections take place over 5 years, but the local plan needs to plan over a much longer period, and there's much more uncertainty over that longer period in terms of what those migration patterns will mean for demand for school places. There also needs to be careful consideration of the impact of growth in the OPDC area on schools in Ealing, and OPDC officers and Ealing officers are currently working to understand how this demand might be met. The nearest Ealing primary schools to the OPDC area are currently at capacity, and though projections show demand decreasing over the next 5 years, it's not yet certain whether there will be any capacity in those schools to absorb OPDC growth. At secondary level, it's expected that although there's likely to be falling demand over the coming years, it's expected that increase in capacity will be absorbed by Ealing pupils currently going to school out of the borough, being able to get places in schools within the borough. So there's no certainty that any of the schools near the OPDC area will be able to absorb that growth. So over the next stages of the IDP and the local plan, we'll be quantifying the additional places required and looking at how and where those should be provided to meet the needs of new housing growth. Okay, moving on to, I'll just pass over to my colleague Alice, who's going to talk a bit about transport.
Hi, I'm Alice Bennett and I've been working on transport infrastructure in Ealing. The figure to the right shows the key rail infrastructure in Ealing and shows that there are 25 existing railway and underground stations. It also shows the future Elizabeth line and the 5 Elizabeth line stations in purple. In addition to this, there are 580 kilometres of highways and 38 bus routes serving 700 bus stops. The key objectives for transport in Ealing, as set out in the Ealing Transport Strategy, include modal shift, reducing the environmental footprint of transport and improving road safety. Transport projects in the pipeline cover road safety, parking controls, bus improvements, new and enhanced rail lines and stations, which includes the Elizabeth line, numerous walking and cycling enhancements, livable neighbourhood schemes and micro-mobility projects. A key challenge for transport in Ealing is frequent short car trips and high vehicle ownership, which in turn has implications for traffic congestion and air quality. This is also being exacerbated by the increased freight movement within the borough. Another challenge is the poor public transport links between north and south of the borough and physical and attitudinal barriers to active travel. Next slide, please. So the figure to the left shows key rail infrastructure against public transport accessibility levels and reveals poor accessibility to the west of the borough. Emerging transport trends for consideration in the new local plan include the growth in electric vehicles, changes to residents' work and social travel, delays over the Elizabeth line opening, move towards demand responsive bus services, demand for dockless cycles and e-scooters, and increased use of data for decision making. Current implications for growth include the impacts of congestion and crowding from regeneration areas, a number of areas with low public transport accessibility levels and restricted accessibility, future working patterns, and helping to facilitate mode shift to help address health congestion and emission issues. I think I'm passing over to James now.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. Good evening, everybody. My name is James Lambert. I'm also a planner at Arup. I'm going to be talking you through the open space and green infrastructure section and the sports facilities section too. So the open space and GI section considers parks, natural green spaces, nature reserves, allotments and cemeteries. And the map on the right shows the existing open space provision in the borough. Key future objectives focus on protecting and improving the existing green space provision, establishing quality and accessibility standards, and promoting the inclusion of green spaces and any new developments that might come forward. And a new open space strategy may also be required soon to replace the previous iteration that covered 2012 to 2017. The project pipeline generally focuses on providing improvements to lower quality existing provision, in addition to securing additional open space through new developments. Challenges include accessibility to open space, in addition to ensuring that it's available for multifunctional uses. And also maintenance going forward is also an issue for open space for the borough as well. And population growth coupled with a shortage of new land for new provision is another challenge too. Next slide, please, as well. Thanks. So in terms of the local plan, the new local plan, key emerging trends focus on the importance of GI. Green infrastructure is recognised increasingly in planning policy, such as the New London Plan, which has a very strong focus on green infrastructure and open space, which is illustrated by Mayor Sadiq's target of making more than 50% of the city green by 2050. So that also shows itself in other considerations, such as the importance of multifunctionality of green infrastructure, which is increasingly well recognised for priorities such as biodiversity net gain, health and well-being, and also carbon sequestration. However, in terms of implications for growth, there is already a variation in the provision across the borough. As you can see on the map, there are areas that are slightly further from green space than others. Also, to plan effectively, there's a need to understand the variation in accessibility and quality of the existing space in order to identify any deficits, which is why a new open space plan may be needed. And that new open space plan could also provide up-to-date standards of provision too. And last but not least, clear planning policies on provision of new open space and improvements of existing open space. And on the next slide is for sports provision. So the sports section covers both indoor provision, which is things like swimming pools, sports halls and gyms, and also outdoor provision such as playing pitches, BMX tracks or artificial grass pitches. Future objectives generally focus on encouraging sports uptake in the name of health and well-being, also in improving the quality of existing provision too, alongside increasing the capacity for areas which have lower provision of certain facilities. There's quite a range of projects in the pipeline, so the ones listed here are just some of the main ones. These include things re-provision of some sports centres, such as the Gurnall Centre in Dormers Wells or the Southall Sports Centre, alongside other projects as well, such as a new BMX track in Perryvale Park, or the redevelopment of the Warren Farm Sports Ground. In terms of main challenges, There's been a shift of demographics in the past few years, which has resulted in changing demands for different sports. So some sports, such as bowls, the demand is decreasing, but for other sports, such as swimming or urban sports, such as skating or BMX, demand is going up. There's also a historic variation of provision across the borough. So there's fewer types of facilities in more urban areas, such as Central Ealing or Southall, but then there's more provision in other areas, as you can see around Greenford and Perryvale. And the final challenge is the availability of both internal funding and, as I said previously, space to develop facilities. On the next slide, in terms of the new local plan, key emerging trends, as I mentioned, some older facilities such as sports centres are now coming to the end of their life and now need replacement. There's also been, as mentioned as well, change in demographics, which is impacting the demand for some facilities, which is leading to increased demand for urban sports provision. And there's also a strong demand for floodlit artificial grass pitches and sand-based 3G pitches. This means that there's a holistic approach is needed to successfully redevelop major sports sites, and that could be achieved through things like co-location of different sports providers. And a final couple of other challenges as well, greater access to outdoor sports equipment. This has gone up, demand for things like outdoor gyms, so there may be a need for greater access to facilities like that. And there's also a small over provision of golf facilities. In terms of implications for growth, there's an uneven provision of some provision across the borough, and active design and future sports facility needs need to be an integrated part of any planning processes in the future. I think I'm handing back to you, Isabel, on the next slide.
Yeah,
thanks.
Thank you, Alice, Anna, and James. That was really helpful. Just an overview of the other sectors that we're still working on at the moment. We've got health, digital, water, energy, climate change, and community facilities. We're currently still in consultation with providers and departments on these sectors, and a lot of these sectors will also be informed when the strategic infrastructure delivery plan is published, so we hope to sort of marry up the two as well and build upon them. So just to flag that we're also currently looking at these sectors and the scope of them, and we've got some emerging trends such as net zero carbon for energy, 5G connectivity for digital, and various health trends that we need to address as we're working through these consultations to again provide the same overview that we just have for the sectors that Anna, James, and Alice ran through with you. We'll be doing the same thing, but I'm just moving on. I'm just conscious that we've presented a lot of information. I just wanted to flag how the process we're going through to develop that information, which is touched on in the previous slide with the different people we're consulting with. But we are consulting with both the council departments and external providers, and reviewing documentation and data to come up with those findings that Anna, Alice, and James have just run through. And the next steps will be to complete the infrastructure baseline report and finish the consultation that I've discussed, so we have a really good understanding of where the borough is currently before we move along this trajectory at the bottom of the slide to look at future growth projections and growth trends. As my colleagues highlighted, there's lots of infrastructure that needs to be provided, and lots of different locations where different pressures are felt differently. So I think there'll be a big task of pulling this together and really identifying where the demand for funding is and looking as to how the local plan can help deliver the infrastructure that is needed. So we'll sort of be moving along this trajectory to develop the growth assumptions, conduct further engagement off the back of those growth assumptions, and then move towards the Regulation 18 local plan and developing a draft IDP. So I think that is everything from us, and I think we're going to do questions at the end. So I will hand it back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Let's see if we get the thank you for that. Yeah, sorry, I had to use my glasses to read the small print. It's the wonders of all those. It's all very good. That really interesting presentation, really interesting details. Thanks also James, Alice, and Anna for coming in on there. We've got one more presentation to go and then we'll move on to questions. We got it's another Isabel this time. Isabel Dedring. Would you like to take over from now on?
Yeah, thanks very much. Only a few more minutes. I guess every time you say Isabel, I get really startled and worried that I'm supposed to be doing something that I'm not doing.
You're on now. That's the key thing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So let me just share my screen. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So if I just move this. There we go. Can you see that all right?
We can see that. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, so first of all, for those of you who don't know me, which I think is everybody actually, so I'm the global transport leader at Arup. And for those of you who don't know very much about Arup, just to say, so we're a global engineering and planning firm and working in all aspects of the built environment, and about 16,000 people worldwide. And I guess the thing that people often don't know about us is we're actually a not-for-profit trust. So we're a very values-driven organization. So despite being sort of the private sector, we're about as close as you can get to the public sector within the private sector, I always think, which was one reason why I joined to do this role, because before I was here, I worked at City Hall for 8 years. So I was Boris's deputy mayor for transport, and before that, his environment advisor. Before that, I worked at Transport for London for 5 years, working very closely with Ken's team on the climate action plan and other things, including the inception of the cycle lanes and the electric black cabs. And, you know, these things always have a very, very long gestation period, don't they? So now I do stay involved in Matters London. I chair the CBI London committee. So that's all by way of saying that I sort of was just working out that I've got nearly 20 years, sadly enough, of sort of behind the scenes, I guess, perspectives on London politics, but also transport in particular. So really happy to share some views in the Q&A maybe as well, or to discuss, you know, really how, when we look at the strategic plan, you know, how are we positioning this and landing it in a, you know, in the wider context, whether that's the city or at the national level. And so just, you know, to kind of frame that a little bit, obviously, when we think about transport and infrastructure planning, you know, it's all about the wider impact that it has. I always try and say that, you know, nobody really cares about transport in itself. People care about transport because of the outcomes it can deliver and what it can potentially enable. Every time you're thinking about transport is probably a time when you're not very happy about it. So, so sort of think about what enabling, you know, actions we can take. So obviously, in thinking about this, Ealing has many opportunities. And I think in particular in the current context where there's a lot of interest in, you know, what's going on with local movement, people moving back into, you know, more neighborhood movement because of the COVID impact, but also some of the things, you know, around micro-mobility, green mobility. So there's some really interesting opportunities there for Ealing to seize. But of course, like many other players and cities and governments around the world, we all share some common transport challenges pretty much everywhere you go, and Ealing's are kind of not that different from what most people would experience. So we do have an opportunity with the plan to think about how we can use transport, not just in the transport context, but as a catalyst for wider change, whether that's around property values, regeneration, well-being, you know, the transition to net zero. So how do we think about it in a slightly wider, from a wider perspective? So a couple of thoughts on that and how we might kind of position this and frame this in the current context. So the first thing to say is that as ever, there's a lot going on in the world of infrastructure. It moves quite slowly, but a lot of things tend to happen in parallel. There's the new national infrastructure strategy focus on private investment. You know, the view that we do need to find techniques to bring more private investment into infrastructure. Strong focus from this government and in the post-COVID context on active travel. Big push on zero and ultra low emission in the context of COP. And this whole, you know, what's the future of mobility? There's all these new business models and technologies coming out. And I guess my observation here really is just that I think there's an opportunity for Ealing and others to get, you know, much more engaged and involved in that. My experience in the London context has often been the boroughs can sometimes see the mayor as the, you know, he will go and talk to government about some of these agendas, whether it's funding, whether it's policy making. And there's no reason why Ealing itself can't, be really forward in going to government about some of these things, whether it's funding streams, whether it's policies that might benefit the borough. And just one example of quite a few that are going on at the moment, Project Rapid, which is a project that we're involved with the DFT, is a £500 million commitment to roll out EV charging infrastructure. So, where does that get based? How does that interface with local movements? And what are the opportunities for Ealing? Just as one small example, that's really worth having direct dialogue with the DFT and understanding how we can use that as a tool to drive decarbonisation and improved air quality in the borough. The second point really is around change and uncertainty. There's a huge amount, more than usual, of uncertainty, as we all know, as we look forward. So it feels like a particularly uncomfortable time in some ways to be talking about a plan, because plan is kind of predicated on the idea of knowing where we're trying to go. And I guess, really for me, what's happened actually in COVID has not really been completely new trends. It's been an acceleration of some previously existing trends. So for example, if you look at the transport context in London, even prior to COVID, there was a significant shift out of public transport happening over the last few years, significant impact on revenue. So tube demand softening, bus revenue dropping, how do we accommodate and leverage the new forms of mobility? And that's only now massively accelerated in the COVID context, but we can't go back to some, halcyon world that didn't exist anyway prior to COVID. And so this sort of opportunity to kind of, in the context of these trends that have accelerated, these trends that have now accelerated, how can we use the plan as an opportunity to really fundamentally maybe rethink some assumptions that we have about how transport needs to be funded and delivered, not just in London, but elsewhere. And so, one of the aspects of that is around local movement, which for many, many years, not just in London, has been this sort of, distant, second cousin, not prioritized relative to the commute and movement in and out of the centre. And the fact that people are staying at home, moving around more in their neighbourhood, et cetera, has really shone a light on the opportunity around what used to be called sort of first and last mile, which is very much focused around, again, the long distance commute. And I think, knowing Ealing a little bit, I think there's a real opportunity here for Ealing to put itself in the forefront in inventing, what does this actually mean looking forward? It isn't just about, throwing a few pounds, towards suburbs and town centres. It's actually about saying, there's a significant increase in appetite for movement in these areas. We do need to rethink how it works more fundamentally than just trying to, shovel in a few cycle lanes and a few extra buses, and hopefully it'll all be okay. So again, knowing Ealing and how innovative it is and the strength of the centre and the kind of quality of thinking that exists in the borough, I think there's a real opportunity, not just within London, but at the national level for Ealing to kind of position itself on the forefront of what does this actually mean, these new trends, and how might we not only manage them, but actually harness them and capitalize on them. And that sort of fits in a bit to this idea of the 15-minute city, which has gained a lot of traction all around the world. Prior to COVID, going to lots of different cities in my professional context, a lot of cities looking at how they can design for the 15-minute city. So, again, London is not a 15-minute city, but is Ealing, able to embed some of those principles and using COVID as a kind of accelerator for that opportunity. And as part of that, how do we actually harness these new technologies, whether that's the new business models, like an Uber type model, whether it's demand responsive buses, which are enabled by technology, but also new business models, e-scooter trials. We're doing the work to assess the e-scooter trials at the DFT for the DFT. But a lot of times I think we all, in city decision making, city policy making, we're on the back foot because these swarm of new business models, little startups asking for, can we park a thing here and could we put our thing over there? And how do we respond to that and get on the front foot and actually leverage and harness those new providers for the ends that we want, not just seeking to accommodate them under pressure. And, you've already got a
strong track record, whether that's working with Brompton or others in this context. So again, I think this is an opportunity for Ealing to lead, because people have not really figured that out yet. Like, cities around the world are still quite on the back foot regarding whether it's Lime bikes or bird scooters. How do we not only accommodate them, but as I say, use these tools as a way of achieving what we want? So what kind of changes might we want to see from government or from the Mayor or TfL in order to enable us to better harness these technologies and these providers is an important question I think we need to kind of explore as part of the planning process. And I guess coming back to the point I was making earlier, thinking about how do we, what's the kind of tone, tenor, or the sort of underlying thinking in the plan has to be agile, flexible, accommodating uncertainty. This isn't something that people in the built environment industry are comfortable with, right? People, engineers, planners, we all like to have certainty, and we're building for 100 years, 200 years, 50 years. And actually what we need to do here is to create a framework that can accommodate and indeed perhaps even thrive on change, agility, and flexibility. And I think, again, that's one of the ways where we could potentially take quite a leading role in our thinking over the next couple of months. How do you actually create something that creates structure, that creates direction, but accommodates and enables change and flexibility within it, and thereby is resilient? This point around funding and financing, I think, is really important. There isn't lots of money floating around. There never was, but there's arguably even less than there was. And TfL's budget, it's well known, is under lots of pressure, as we all know. So there's something here about thinking about more broadly about how we leverage other funding sources, new ways of financing, et cetera. And I know that's already under consideration, but the more broadly we can think about it, the better. And what do we have to offer in partnership with the GLA or government potentially? Many of the examples of innovation in this area in London came out of discussions with the boroughs around specific projects. So again, I would just really encourage any ideas that we have in the context of the plan. There's no reason to be waiting for someone else to come forward with something. Are there projects or proposals that we can bring forward that have innovative funding and financing at the heart of those projects? And then I think finally, just around, what is Ealing's role beyond Ealing? And obviously, I know, West London Alliance and other, organizations exist to bring the boroughs together at the sub-regional level. But, I do think my experience over the last sort of 15, 20 years has been that West London doesn't have the profile that it should have, whether that's within central London, within government, within the GLA. That really strong focus on East London, hasn't been given to West London. Maybe sometimes that's been a good thing, but is this an opportunity to really shift the focus? Not, saying that we shouldn't be focusing on East London, but it's like, now we need to give that level of focus to West London. And how do we do that? By creating something that's exciting, interesting, different, dynamic, and, trying to kind of improve the momentum behind the thinking around West London, because certainly in my experience in sort of, London corridors and in national government corridors, my view would be that it doesn't have the profile that it should have and that it deserves. So in order to achieve that, we probably have to reframe what our story is for West London. And that includes beyond the London context, because when we think about the levelling up agenda, which I think broadly is a threat for London, if we don't handle it correctly, the more we can position West London in a wider context beyond, the M25, its role as a hub for strategic infrastructure, its role kind of looking into that kind of wedge as you look out to the north and west, and what is Ealing's role from an infrastructure perspective in that context is an important and useful angle on this, which breaks us out of, it's just some bit of London, which is kind of less interesting than East London. And there is a bit of that sort of preconceived notion. So I think that's an area that's really worth drawing out as part of this exercise. So in summary, how can we be even more proactive in taking advantage of national policies, programs, and funding?
how can we raise Ealing's profile, I think, within London and the GLA family. I would say some boroughs get disproportionate, attention and profile, and that sometimes has consequences in terms of funding, engagement, policy, et cetera. So I think we can continue to promote that, and the plan is an opportunity through doing some innovative thinking to do that. TfL's business model is fundamentally, in need of reinvention as a result of what's gone on with fares. Is national road pricing one opportunity to explore that? Is third-party funding, in terms of development, for example, another opportunity? Can Ealing play a role as a thought partner to TfL and an innovator in helping to reinvent that business model? How can we become, a trailblazer in terms of new transport modes and providers? When you think about the strength of Ealing Town Centre, is there a kind of, way of role modeling what we want to use these new mobility services for? And again, then influencing TfL as a policymaker, as a regulator, as a licensor to help to enable and deliver what it is that we want to do in Ealing. Then this point around agility and flexibility, I think, is really key and kind of quite uncomfortable for the most professionals in the built environment, but we need to move in that direction. And then this point around moving, reinventing West London perhaps a bit and bolstering its profile. And I think the plan is a really exciting chance for us to start to do that. So probably just leave it there. And I think now we're going into questions, if I've understood correctly.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you very much, Isabel. That was thank you to all the presenters. That's been really, really informative. It's quite a lot to take in. I'm sure there'll be a number of questions. Can I ask councillors if they want to indicate by virtually raising their hands? And I'll probably take a couple of questions in a row. It might help if you say if it's to a specific presenter or so, but we'll see if there's any hands that are rising at all. All right. Okay, it looks. I can't. Hang on. I've got something in the chat that's a stress on how good a presentation it was. It's from David Scarfield. Are there any comments from any councillors or any questions?
I was just wondering, I'd be interested to if councillors were able to offer a view on, how is this something that you would see more as a kind of drawing together of West London? Is it, we're going to rebrand where we're heading? Is it just capturing what we're already doing? It'd be interesting to just get a feel for that, because I think it will, from a, let's say, small p political perspective, how do we design this and populate it in a way that's going to have maximum impact and benefit for the public, I guess.
Okay, I've seen a raised hand from Councillor Shittle-Munro. Do you want to comment on that point or related one or both?
I mean, in general, this is the issue really is, I think, one of communication, because what we find in terms of the public perception of what's actually happening is completely different to what we actually do in real life. So all these plans, I somehow wish we could get it to the public, because what happens is there's always, in terms of planning and in terms of development, always the issue of health services, school places, transport issues, and they're not aware of all the previous work that goes on in terms of planning for all of these changes which are coming forward. So yeah, in a way, I don't know how we do it, but it's really difficult to persuade 100 people who are shouting for your blood at a planning meeting, not at the moment because we're virtual, how you persuade them that a lot of this stuff has been thought through and has actually been planned for, because they see the real life as they see it that very minute, and they don't see something 10 years later. So I don't know how we get that message to them. I don't know whether we could get this stuff out more widely through our communications, but it really is an issue where they don't believe us. Really, the members of the public actually do not believe that we actually know what we think we know we were doing, or whether we've actually planned for it. So I wonder, that's really my comment on this stuff. It's really good stuff, but it just doesn't get out to the public.
Could I just offer 2 quick views on that, Meg? So I think the first thing is, I think as an industry around the world, we've been really bad at this for a very long time. It's kind of like, here's the thing that we already wrote and we'd like to have your opinion on it, but basically we've already decided. It is the sort of general feeling. And then that's why people, and one of the reasons why people get, cross. And certainly within Arup, we're doing a lot more work now that's much just a different form of engaging with the public. And I'm sure that, Isabel or Matt or other colleagues would be happy to talk to you guys about that, things that we've tried elsewhere that have worked much better by engaging people in different ways. So that's one thought. And the digital, platforms and social media are partly can be, a challenge, but they can also be an opportunity if we use them right. As you guys know, of course. The other thing is, I think there's often a kind of the plan is seen as the communication tool, and in quite a lot of places, we end up doing 2 almost completely separate pieces of work. One is like, this is the story of what we're trying to do, and then separately, there's the planning process, and they just sometimes benefit from almost being treated as 2 separate work streams, because that way you can really focus on like, what's the story that we want to tell. Obviously, it all comes from the same set of facts. But it's just a different way of engaging with people, because I agree, like planning documents are not what most people want to sit down and read on a Wednesday evening. Present company excluded, obviously.
I've got 2 more too. I'll come to you as well. I just want to make sure that Councillor Condon knows that I will come to him afterwards. Go for it, Isabel J.
Can you come here a minute?
Matt, you're not on mute.
Sorry, did you want me to go, or were you?
If you go, Isabel, that'll be fine.
Sorry, I was just going to build on that quickly. I don't know whether Steve or Brianne want to come in, but I completely agree. It's a really important point about the consultation and taking the public on that journey with us and explaining the rationale, because it's quite complex. That we do a lot of thinking behind, and it's an iterative stage, like I said, around making these decisions. And I think the public want to be engaged on them. And we are working at the moment as part of my secondment as well with the local plan team to try and look into the different ways to engage, and using digital platforms like you mentioned, and capitalizing on this greater interest that the public have and accessibility that they have through COVID, ironically, in the ability to sign on like this and to this sort of forum rather than have to trek somewhere after they've picked people up from school and making dinner, etc., or catch up and it be online. It's becoming more accessible, and I think we are looking at ways that we can capitalize on that and to bring people into the conversation, because it is really important. So I just wanted to flag that as well.
Very, very important issue to raise and to highlight. And yeah, the engagement that we can do through technology is amazing. We've obviously got to make sure we include as many people as possible, particularly those who don't have that access, but we'll try all the different ways around it. So that's important. Councillor Condon, Paul, did you want to come in with a question or a comment?
Yes, Chair. Yeah. Can you hear?
Yep, I can hear you, Cole.
Okay. It's more of a comment, really, on that last presentation in particular. Raised interesting questions about the profile of West London and the sort of role of Ealing in West London, and how we see our role, which, it seems to me it's an important issue. Obviously, it's quite a big topic to take up, but it does seem to me that East London has for a long time had a much higher profile, partly because West London has been seen as prosperous and East London has been seen as deprived and therefore needing regeneration and so on. But of course, the image of West London as prosperous only ever really applied to parts of West London, especially inner West London, and large parts of West London are actually rather deprived, including, of course, parts of Ealing. And also, a lot of East London has now very successfully been regenerated. Not that there's not still a lot of deprivation there, but there's also a lot of regeneration, and a lot of areas that are now, very fashionable, regarded as rather attractive areas. there was a previous director of regeneration at Ealing who made some comment, I remember, about Ealing being the new Hackney. And I must admit, I found it difficult to not sort of start sniggering at that point, because there's so many, ways that Ealing is very different from Hackney. And I suspect a lot of Ealing residents would probably be appalled at the idea of Ealing being like Hackney. But maybe in some ways it does make sense, and we should be thinking of what sort of image of the borough we want, and how we want to promote it. I mean, a lot of residents, I think, they would probably, some that I talk to in certain demographics, they quite aspire to Ealing being more like Richmond. That's kind of like the perfect sort of borough that they should think Ealing should be like, and they kind of basically can't afford to live in Richmond, but they'd like Ealing to be more like it. And I just don't like that idea at all, because I think, a strength of Ealing is its diversity, and the fact that it's not just a load of rich people, that it's got very affluent people, but also much less affluent people, and it's got people from all over the world and people of all sorts of races. But really, I'm not going very far with this comment, but I'm just saying it's something that we need to think about, and we do really need to think about ways that we can raise the profile and raise the image of Ealing. And it would have lots of benefits, like, the fact that we find it very difficult, I think, to attract any decent architecture in Ealing. Although we've got a lot of development, none of that development is by really top architects. And none of it is the sort of development that actually gets, nominated for architectural awards or anything like that, let alone, winning architectural awards. So, I'll just throw that sort of issue out there, and maybe if someone has any comments on what we can do, it would be interesting to hear them.
You want to come in and explain how we can attract top architects to the wonders of Ealing? That'd be very interesting.
I mean, just two quick thoughts on that, Paul. I really agree with what you're saying there. And you want to be the most Ealing, not the most something else, right? But I think it's not well understood within the city. And, maybe at one level, who cares? But at another level, it's actually useful to be able to attract the right businesses, attract the right residents, but also attract funding and, the right sort of interventions. So, I mean, just two quick thoughts. I think there's much, much more focus on this whole question around how we can use strategic infrastructure, which is the name of this plan, to help to drive social cohesion and social, benefit, social equity. So in a diverse borough like Ealing is the perfect place to model how we actually go about doing that. And nobody knows how to do it, because, at least not in transport land, because she says, but it's true, because for years it was like not our problem, not something we needed to think about, maybe somebody else's problem. We're just here building big stuff. It's good. So is there an opportunity in a more subtle way for Ealing to kind of, build that connectivity using the infrastructure and also non-strategic infrastructure, right? Like the sort of smaller interventions to do something meaningful, I think is exciting. And the other thing is Ealing's kind of structure is perfect for modeling what the kind of post-COVID neighborhood movement, investment looks like in a high quality form. And is there something there that you guys could put forward to the GLA, to the government, that's exciting, that needs investment, but that they can get behind because it's in line with the policies that they've got in mind? And I think and that also comes back to the engagement point, because if we have something compelling and exciting, then the public's more likely to get behind it. Easy. Done. Yeah.
There's the challenge for us, Paul, that we can work through on that one. I've also got an indication from Councillor Shaw, then I'll come to you, Councillor Munro, after that, if that's okay, unless it's on this specific point. Gareth, do you want to go in?
Thanks, Mick. So my video doesn't seem to be starting, but don't worry about that. I'll just keep talking anyway and see if I can get it going eventually.
We can hear you.
Oh, here we go. Look, can we go? Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I was quite interested, as we've had previous meetings looking at this, and looking at the structure of the borough and the town centres, if you like, and how that might provide flexibility as to where we do sort of try and point things. Whether rather than centering one particular growth and development in one particular area, and that links to some of the transport problems. Particularly in some of the areas of the borough and some of the public transport problems particularly. And so, there are a number of things that need to be overcome in developing, a sort of regionalised and perhaps spoked structure, based around some of the big transport places that we have, whether they're the main roads, or more dependency on public transport. Although, as we've just heard, the public transport offer has actually been declining and been in decline for a number of years now. But to bring it back as well to the parts of what we're looking at in terms of developing our actual local plan, and the flexibility that might be needed in the modern world. Particularly, it almost sounds perhaps that this is a local plan that is, almost unplanned. It's sort of removing the centralised plan idea and instead designating areas, perhaps, that these are the areas we want to see develop strategically. And how can this actually happen? And I think one of the biggest challenges we have as a local authority, and this will apply to every local authority, is actually where this money comes from. Because our own finances are under huge amounts of pressure, and that's only going to get worse over the next few years. Let's not kid ourselves about this. Where the council will be in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, that we're sort of looking at over the life plan of the local plan is going to be significantly different to how it was 20 years ago, and even where we are right now. So these are things that we really need to consider. So I suppose really, if there is a question in there that there wasn't, it's more of a comment, but perhaps sort of throwing it back towards Isabel, is when you talk about this sort of being nimble, if you like, within your plan and having the flexibility within the plan, how you think that could be structured from a local authority perspective that cannot rely on central government funding and that doesn't have that funding readily available. So we're really sort of looking at where we attract the more private funding and private equity into the local area.
Chair, perhaps I can attempt a partial answer of that quite broad question.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
I mean, one of the interesting things is before we went into the present local plan process, and certainly before we embarked on our collective COVID journey, one of the objectives for the local plan was quite explicitly stated as being the reintegration of different uses. So it's nothing new in a large city like London. It's nothing new in terms of an increasingly globalized economy, that different uses, and particularly those that relate to wealth creation and employment, have been unbundling and moving apart. And it's particularly apparent in London with the concentration of most of the highest value employment in central London, and then the creation of these very strong tidal patterns of commuting that I referred to briefly in the presentation. And all of this has started to unbundle as a result of COVID. Similarly, there's been, would have escaped anybody's notice, there have been changes in people's patterns of people's leisure usage. And there's been a growing interest in among employment providers for a model which was advanced as a theory quite a long time ago, which is basically people doing local commutes to local hubs and then teleworking from there rather than working from home. So I suppose what is interesting that's come out of the present situation is, first of all, it's feeding into a lot of the things that we were looking at. So I mentioned that the work on West London Orbital, for example, has been looking specifically at those orbital routes which are ill-served by London's existing transport infrastructure. One of the statistics that I didn't put up from the same study that we took the map from, which was a TfL study, was actually that even before the present changes, 73% of journeys in the West London sub-region began and ended within that sub-region. So while you were exactly correct, and Isabel Dedring was exactly correct about the further exacerbation of problems which have taken place with funding as a result of present circumstances, I think there's a potential tide in terms of the direction that development is taking, which could be quite constructively harnessed to do all the things that we would wish to do anyway. So again, it's not escaped anybody's notice that doing less traveling is better for the environment, that the ability to balance your work and life arrangements is good for people's health. I mean, similarly highlighted, in fact, the considerable importance of the quality of housing, both in terms of the fact that the virus has been transmitted primarily within overcrowded households, but also that it's occurred as a result, or that it's highlighted the need for flexible housing and all the rest of it. But I suppose, so the answer, all of these exercises, both in terms of infrastructure planning and the outputs of the plan themselves, are about integrating, bringing together and reinforcing the potential benefits of different activities. And it certainly looks as though we may have a chance to do that as a result of the changes that we're seeing. So certainly a time characterized by some opportunities as well as some very obvious difficulties.
Thank you very much, Sam. Shetal, I'll get you to come in. I think Faye also had a question, so I'll come to you afterwards, Faye. Shetal, do you want to go forward?
Okay, now I can ask my question. Sorry, before I was responding back to what was said. Couple of transport related, quite separate. One is, I suppose, I haven't really heard anything about Heathrow and the effect that's having on West London in terms of the economic effects and what the future might hold for air transport through the Heathrow region. The other one actually is a bit more local. It's around the change in retail and changing into parcel deliveries and etc. And I was just wondering, but I really like the idea of the 15-minute city. And in many parts of the world, they don't actually have deliveries to your doorstep. And they have sort of central locations where you go to collect your mail and collect your parcels. Now, if we were to try and plan ahead for the future, it would be a good way of getting people to walk. If you had, within 15 minutes, a place where you would have to collect your parcels, and then that would actually stop all these vans, etc., driving around our side streets and all over the place. So I'm just wondering, are we doing sort of out of the box thinking about how could we actually change the structure of our lives where people actually pop out in the evening to go pick up the letter or pick up the parcel within 15 minutes. So it's not a big journey, but it is a journey you have to make to get your parcel. There are two sort of transport related. One is very local, one is international air transport. So I just wondered how the two would match.
Cool. I think, Isabel, did you want to come in on that? Is that Isabel Dedring, that is?
Yeah, no, I was going to make a different point, actually.
On a different point. All right. Just, if anyone,
yeah, I can touch on the second point, but go to others first. I think Matt or Isabel could comment on the Heathrow point.
Is it Matt from Arab as well? Yeah.
Yeah, Matt Lally is also working with the team, so I think he will explain his relationship with Heathrow and how he sort of came involved with Ealing.
Crikey,
well suited to answer that question.
That seems like
that's quite an introduction there as well,
pass, if ever there was.
I mean, the Heathrow Strategic Planning Group, Matt, of course.
Yeah.
Go for it, Matt.
I was going to make some other points as well, but I suppose we can sort of try and wrap it in. I mean, I was very taken by Councillor Conlon's sort of comments that were really, to me, expressing the importance of vision. And I think Isabel Dedring was sort of, expressing some of our anxieties as planners around, the real challenges of planning in the traditional sense of coming up with a blueprint for growth, given just how many uncertainties there are and so forth. But I think what we can do is express a clear vision, and for that vision to be born of issues of local identity, local character and so forth, but not just in an abstract sense, but then making sure that that vision is applied in reality, and that individual projects that flow through, and Councillor Conlon sort of mentioned issues of architectural quality, projects that follow through are clearly an expression of that vision. And that, you know, in terms of communication, people can see that, you know, we're coming up with some big strategic thinking, and we're actually applying that to very specific projects on the ground. And to link to some of the other points about sort of lack of cash for some of these things can be really quite modest. And, you know, there's some really quite interesting projects around sort of meanwhile uses, using, you know, building sites and other temporary spaces to actually, you know, get things going and sort of suggest possibilities, possibly sort of trial new business opportunities and so forth. And I mean, to give one example, we in Arup funded ourselves. We took out a couple of parking spaces in front of our office and sort of to replace those with a little parklet, you know, a space for people to gather. And it was tremendously, you know, successful, and just, it was totemic, you know, it indicated an approach, and it expressed a vision of the future, but in a very modest way. And so I think sort of thinking along those lines is also part of the, you know, solution. It's not just about the grand plan, but it's actually about some really quite modest, specific projects that give expression to some of the principles that the council is wanting to promote. So that was sort of a general point that I was going to make. I mean, we've been working with Steve Barton and others on the joint spatial planning framework that some of you will know about, that was promoted by the Heathrow Strategic Planning Group. And although that group came together in the context of planned Heathrow Airport growth, which is, you know, isn't happening certainly in the short to medium term in the way that we were expecting sort of a year or two ago. Nonetheless, a lot of the proposals that are included within that strategic exercise are still relevant, you know, relating to transport infrastructure, relating to flooding infrastructure, and so on. But critically, how these come together and how we think about these things in a coordinated way. So yes, there are still questions about Heathrow's growth, which will still occur within the existing legal sort of parameters that are set. But I think, you know, it's about sort of leveraging as much benefit as we can out of Heathrow, and critically thinking about the range of projects that are planned to take place around the Heathrow Airport area, and sort of thinking about how we can make the most of those in a positive way for the residents and employees of the borough.
Thank you very much. Again, very interesting. And the think of big projects which aren't necessarily gigantic is actually a good one, where a small little pocket park can make a big difference. So that's a definite one to build on board. Councillor Faye Block, did you want to come in with a question or a comment?
Yeah, it's just going on from what we were speaking about at the last meeting, really. Elephant in the room to me is the government's white paper on planning reform. And so, you know, we're looking at our local plans and our vision for our borough, and you know, and you know, one of the things we were discussing tonight, you know, taking people on with us and having that, you know, a meaningful consultation, so residents have a say. And yet we've got this huge reform coming that kind of takes away power from the borough, power from residents, kind of ability to have a say in, you know, how we kind of marry these two very conflicting kind of positions we're in.
Would anyone like to comment on that? I think it's a very good observation.
Yeah, I can, if that helps. It's something that we've been discussing with Steve Barton and the team a lot, and the white paper has put a vast amount of reforms forward, and we're waiting to see sort of which ones are taken forward and how they take shape. And I think it's definitely something that we need to bear in mind, of course, as we move forward, and it sort of adds another layer of uncertainty, as we've mentioned. But I think what's key, what we did take from the white paper that's key, is that infrastructure delivery to support growth and to improve places is essential. And the white paper puts a lot of weight on that. And no matter what form the local plan may take in the future, the borough is still going to need a good understanding of where it wants to be, what its vision is, and the infrastructure it may need to get there. So I think it's a really important point, and definitely something that we should be transparent about and react to as we get more information. But taking the cues from it at the moment, I think the work that we're doing in reviewing the current situation with infrastructure, having these conversations of future thinking about where we want to get to as a borough is really important. And then we can sort of apply that to whatever new structure of the local plan is given from central government. But at least then we've established the borough's position, where you are now and where you want to be. And then it will be a case of seeing how the local plan under the new system, whatever it may be, can take shape to support that. I don't know whether any other colleagues in the planning team have a view.
I could add to that quite briefly. I think you're right, Isabel, that there is at least the baseline in the proposals that infrastructure planning remains very important. However, the corresponding problem is that probably the biggest assault, and at the moment it's a sin of omission, not of commission, is that the proposals have absolutely nothing to say about the role of strategic planning in local authorities. We're effectively conceived of as not having a strategic role. Now, that's obviously a substantial risk. I think in terms of the questions that are being asked here, it's potentially something we could get around with area-specific plans. So look, area by area. That's potentially a lot more work than dealing with them strategically. But that element at least is not impossible. I think the greater constraint in the planning white paper will come from dealing with individual schemes, which will become trickier. But as we said, it does also really not have a strategic dimension at all.
Okay, thank you very much for that intervention.
Sorry, I just wondered.
Go for it, Shittle.
The second question I asked around the extra number of vans which are wandering our borough delivering parcels, and whether we could do something different. I just wondered whether somebody could address that, because I don't think it's really been addressed.
Shall I comment on that? So I would just say it's a really good point, and it's an area that, like, also if I just think about globally, nobody's really tackled this yet. There's everybody complains about it, but nobody's got the answer. So there's little attempts to tackle it. So this is another example where, like, absolutely, there are various trials and small scale efforts to do this. Like the Amazon pickup point at your BP station, or the Underground's done a trial. I don't know whether you saw on underground stations. So they have like pickup points at underground stations. The idea being that you're coming home anyway, and so you just pick it up on the way. And those have been very successful, but they're quite small scale, because it's like, and a handful of stations, a handful of BP, petrol stations. So if you thought about embedding it into your plan, that's really interesting, because that's an opportunity to take those trials. In transport at the moment, we've got all this old school way of doing things, and then we've got lots and lots of little ideas springing up, hundreds of little ideas. So is there a way to use the plan as a tool to kind of draw through those little ideas and make them bigger, scale them up, basically? So you could, and planning is the perfect tool to drive exactly what you're talking about there. So I really like that idea. And I think coming back to Matt's point about vision, if we can kind of bind that together with 8 or 10 other things, and we're saying we see Ealing as a 21st century transport, post-COVID transport borough, where we're going to have, these things all together. And when we take them in the round, it's a really exciting and interesting vision, of which that, your freight point could be, one key component. Just while I've got the floor, I was just going to make 2 other quick points. I just think orbital movement has been, again, not just London, around the world. It's like something that people of transport are like, oh, that's not a thing. Nobody wants to go in a circle. It's absurd. right? And so for years, orbital movement has suffered from this sort of mythology that nobody wants to move orbitally in cities because everyone wants to come into the center and come back out again. And I think that still exists quite a lot in the back of people's minds, even though if you look at London, the example of the overground, I mean, I live in Camden, it's been transformational for my neighborhood, and you just can't argue with the results, right? But there's still a lot of that lingering around. So I was just going to say that I think thinking about the orbital project more in the context of local movement, the post-COVID diversity of movement, right? The fact that it's not going to be all about the commute. It's actually about enabling, there's going to be more businesses moving out, more development, to Sam's point, and therefore we're enabling a new form of movement, which makes us modern, forward thinking, on the cutting edge and all that sort of stuff. So there's something there around kind of maybe reframing the orbital question. And then the other point I was going to make really quickly was I really like the point somebody made around, if we think about maybe strategic areas where we want to focus growth, development, or innovation, rather than the plan setting out very specific interventions. It just, in case it's interesting, when I was at City Hall, we set up something called the Growth Fund, and it focused on particular areas around the city. And what was good about it, I mean, there were lots of things that didn't work, as ever, in life. But one of the things that worked really well was, rather than saying, these are the interventions we're going to make, we just said, this is where we're going to focus our efforts, whatever that means. And it's going to be a combination of funding streams, policy interventions, just oomph from the leadership within the GLA. And it was very effective in a few areas. So you could sort of take that approach, this is where we're going to kind of focus, here's a box within which we're going to focus our efforts. And that wouldn't be one place in Ealing, it would be in a few places. And that
Oh dear, are we lost, Isabel?
I think we're losing Isabel, yeah.
No, I can hear you, but
maybe if you turn your camera off, dare I say, as much as it's nice to see your smile, it might improve the bandwidth.
So we've still got you on camera, but we can't. You're not speaking.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's still loud and clear, even though we can also see you as well. So why don't you try and finish the point if you can.
The last bit, well, it was just really around like creating this sort of focal point for funding and policy making, where I think, I really like that idea. It's sort of not being super specific, but it's creating a kind of focal point. And then we can use that to pursue relevant government funding streams and interventions, rather than just like, we want money for stuff, right? For our general, coffers. It's, you've got you've got funding for electric buses, you've got funding for cycle lanes, you've got funding for this. Great. Well, we can put that right here. And it may be a more effective way to try and tap into government funding streams rather than a kind of general issue of local government funding.
Cool. And any tips for getting government funding are very, very welcome, particularly in the light of Councillor Shaw's
I do think that'll be effective. And I have to say, London boroughs are really bad at this, because it's like the GLA goes and talks to government. Why shouldn't Ealing go and talk to government the same way Sheffield does? We're probably about the same size, she said very unscientifically.
But cool. All right, I can't see any other hands up from councillors. Let me just double check if there's anything in the chat. Nope, that's not that. I think basically that probably brings the main thrust of the questions and the comments there. Are there any other points that people would like to raise, or shall I could do a quick short summing up if people are content on that basis. I think making Ealing bigger is probably a really, really, really good point in terms of like how we can raise our profile and put things on the element. I think Councillor Munro's point about thinking differently, it's a pet hate of mine always has been, in terms of like you can get an order something online, they say, oh, this one's not in stock but will be in 2 days time, we'll send you it in 2 packages, and it's like, why not just send it in one and wait? And people go, oh no, I want it immediately. So there is that need to change, and those things like the Amazon lockers that are around, I've seen them in central London and at stations as well. You can see like there could be something to do on that front. I think that the overall scope and the importance on the infrastructure side, just the presentations, and then Councillor Conlon asked if they'll be shared afterwards, and they will be, so that'll be great. Just the sheer scope and depth, you know, just from the energy side through to water, and also things like the 5G side of things, and making sure that we're integrated and that people can take the benefit of that as well. There's lots and lots of projects and potentials around here. And it's a case of like, yeah, I think your point, Isabel, at the end, this is Isabel G, sorry, not Isabel J. I think your point about really we need to stand up and be at the forefront. Us as local councillors are people who are supposed to stand out and speak out for the community and speak on behalf of the community, but we've got to do that all the way around, not just in our locality, but in central government as well, and as far widely as possible. And the point about 15-minute cities could be very, very interesting, because we've got very specific points of the borough of Ealing, which people can go around from Acton to Ealing to North Holt and all the rest, where we can apply that and see how it works, and we can try different types of experiments. So it's all about trying and doing, and hopefully not failing, but succeeding. So on that basis, I'd like to say thank you very much for all the detailed presentations. They were really, really valuable, really, really helpful, and for the discussion points. I think that covers the main aspects of the overall agenda tonight, actually. I'm conscious that there was also a member of the public that wanted to raise an issue which wasn't really relevant, I would say, specifically to this part of the plan. So if people, I think I'm going to conclude what was, let me just check my notes, item 6, and I'm going to introduce an odd item 7 as an any other business. So if people don't want to stay for this part in terms of the presenters and stuff, thank you very much for all your contributions. Do enjoy the rest of your evenings. I know people have taken time out for that. But Kay, did you want to come in? It's Kay, forgive me if I'm pronouncing your surname wrong. Kay Jarmison?
Garmison.
Nick, are you okay for us to drop off? Do you want us to drop off?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Kay, yeah, I just thought in terms of your points and comments, I know that you should hopefully have received an email, but I thought your questions are more off the main topic of this, so I'll just take it as an any other business. I don't know if you want to still ask your 3-minute question or so.
Yes, I would, please, because although it's been said to me that it's not relevant to the meeting, I think it's highly relevant, because we've just lost one chair of the LDPAC committee, and it seems to me that things are rather adrift, and that my questions are relevant to the total process. So I apologise if they don't seem to belong to this particular meeting, but I don't know when else to ask them. And in the context of Councillor Munro's comments, that he feels that he was asking the question, how do we bring people along with us? It's by listening to people and allowing them to participate and responding to their questions. So if I go through what I had to say, firstly, some months have slipped by since the last LDPAC meeting, and the draft local development plan timetable published on the 3rd of June is now clearly out of date. My first question, therefore, is when will you produce and make public a revised version as part of the local development scheme that the council is statutorily required to publish and keep updated? It's a very mundane question, but I think it's very important if you sincerely want to involve the public. They need to know when things are happening. I found out today from a scrutiny meeting report, deep in the bowels of this report, that the Reg 18 public consultation is now apparently scheduled for May 2021. It would have been nice for the public to know that, but we don't. Okay, second point, my second question is, why is Ealing Council failing to fulfil its statutory duty, again, a statutory duty, to publish its AMRs? By what date will they be made public? I asked my last question on this on the 28th of October to Julian Bell in the absence of a committee chairman. I received a response 2¼ hours before this meeting. And that response is inadequate because it says that we will receive this new AMR covering 6 years of data early next year. I don't think that's good enough. I want a date when we are going to receive this. Ealing's residents deserve to know when they are going to get this information. Partly because if we don't know where we are now, as we don't and haven't done for 6 years, then it's impossible to plan where to go next. In the absence of any AMR, I'd like to draw the committee's attention to Ealing Matters Planning Applications Database. It covers major planning applications from all parts of the borough, going back as far as the 2000s, and includes details of size and scale, housing mix and housing tenure. It's not exhaustive, but we believe it starts to paint a picture of the evolution of housing development and therefore the shape of the borough over the next decade. We will publish more detailed analyses of the database, but I would just like to say that our information suggests that we have enough in the pipeline to cover current and future housing targets under the London Plan. So why then are we continuing to promote more house building? The usual answer is that we need more homes that people need, but we're not delivering these. Only 11% of the planned housing units that we can measure will provide accommodation with 3 bedrooms or more. Only 14% of the units will be available at London affordable rent. And of these, only a small percentage will be offered at lower social rent. Almost 2/3 of units will be privately owned. The question for the local plan, and therefore this committee, has to be, how do we bridge this gap before we concrete over the whole borough? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kat. I think the committee can note the comments on that. With regards to the AMR, we will be looking at publishing that. I can't give you a specific date at the moment, but it will be early next year. And to be honest, I think it's also something that we will go into a bit more detail. So one of the discussions I've had with the committee people in the background is actually bringing that to our next meeting, which will be early next year as well. You know, we are trying to be transparent. We are trying to make sure the details are out there and the information is there. I've only, as you said, recently taken on the chairship of this committee. We'll take it going forward, but I'd like to thank you for your contribution and say it is noted. We'll make sure that we'll keep stuff in the background. If there's further stuff that you want to highlight, you've got you should hopefully have my details, or I can drop them to you. I've got your email address. And we can take that further if need be, but we should hopefully be making sure that we meet our requirements. There have been some issues regarding getting information out from other bodies that has impacted our elements, but we don't need to go into the details. I'll just sit down and say we are trying to keep working with the transparency going forward. So that covers that basis. Chantal, did you want to come in on this point?
Yeah, sorry, there was just one point for clarification, Chair. I think there's a statement's been made that we've fulfilled our housing requirements. That's on the basis that 100% of the permissions that have been given actually get billed. And that, I would like to point out, is actually not the case. More often than not, we give permissions and they're never actually put into place and actually built. So that is why we do actually carry on, you know, looking at new developments and new permissions, because we find that many of them never ever get to be built. So it's not a matter of numbers. Just because you give permission doesn't mean to say it gets built. It's just clarification.
Could I just say, I understand that you've made that point before, Councillor Munro. However, I would say that the planning permissions that you grant do give an indication of the direction of travel and what you are aiming to deliver in the borough. It may not come to fruition, but it does give a picture of what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's very important. And in the absence of any AMR, it's better than nothing.
But we will have an AMR, don't worry about that. That will be early next year. Thank you, Kate. Thank you for the clarification, Councillor Rowe. I don't have any further indications, and I don't have any other business apart from that, which obviously came through. The date of the next meeting's not been finalised yet, but I'm hoping to agree that soon enough. So that will be circulated around to members. Again, thanks to everyone for their contributions and for their information. The presentations will be circulated to members to look through with details, and if there's any further information or requirements or feedback, do feel free to drop stuff through to me as well. I'm very, very interested to hear any further points if you have a good look at the presentation and something springs to mind that we need to take on board. So thank you all for...
Will you please put the presentations on your website?
I can talk to the IT team to see which ones, if we're able to, in terms of what's available. Thank you, Kay. We can deal with it on that basis. Thank you all very much. I think on that basis, I will allow everyone else the rest of their evening. So thank you for your time.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night all.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.